Is the TV show MASH your favorite of all time? Then you should read Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And before we get to the review, one question. Did I enjoy this read? And the answer is yes. Hey guys, welcome to Whiskey and Literature. I'm your host, Captain Mike, and I'm reading and reviewing 52 books in 52 weeks in 2023. This is my 28th book review of the year so far, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And if you're confused because you came here for the whiskey, you're in the right place, just the wrong video. I do both whiskey and book reviews, which isn't confusing for anybody I know. If you came for the whiskey, feel free to stick around for the book review. It's a pretty good book and you might just enjoy it and want to pick it up after the review. And before we get to the book, let's talk about the author Joseph Heller briefly. He was an American author born in 1923. He passed away in 1999. Catch-22 is his best known work, as well as the sequel. And he was nominated in 1972 for the Nobel Prize in Literature. And importantly for this book specifically, he was in World War II. He was a bombardier in a B-25, and he did 60 missions in combat. Okay, let's talk about the specs and stats for Catch-22. Heller started writing this in 1953, and he published it in 1961. My copy has 453 pages in it. I picked up this copy at the Goodwill bookstore in Sarasota for $3. Again, I'm reading 52 books this year. I owned a couple of them before I began this challenge, but Catch-22 wasn't one of them. So I essentially bought like 49 books at the same time. Finding gems like this, and I think I bought 17 or 18 of the books at the Goodwill bookstore. So if you like to read, you want to find books, I've got friends who just go to the library, and that's obviously a legit awesome. I've spent many hours in libraries, but finding a nice, good, clean copy of the book for $3 is great. I actually had a hard time finding used bookstores in my area. I found them on Google Maps, and I would go there and it would be closed. I was pretty sad, actually. It does get worse though, because I owned a copy of Catch-22, this same book, and I tried to read it like 20 plus years ago, and I couldn't get through it. And when we moved to Florida in 2021, I had to make painful choices on my books. I had like 3 bookcases double stacked everywhere, and I threw away, donated quite a few books, and Catch-22 was one of those. So I actually owned this book, threw it away, and had to buy a new copy this year. But that's okay. And I did listen to quite a bit of this book on Audible, and it's read by J.O. Sanders for 19 hours and 58 minutes. And man, he did a wonderful job. Okay, let's talk about the style of the book. It is a war satire, kind of, because while we are at war with Germans, they're really, other than dropping bombs and dodging flak, there really is no war or no combat anyway in the book. Themes include the power of bureaucracy, in this case, the military-industrial complex. Absurdity with regards to the situations the characters were in, their reactions to them, and even the actions of the leaders of the military. Religious faith, or the lack thereof. Death, the inevitability, yeah, there you go. The death, the inevitability of death, tragedy, and farce, usually having to do with miscommunications, and honestly, it was really well done in this book. And we have an omniscient style narrator, and seeing all the action from many different points of view, and we often repeat the same events with further details that flesh out the story. And the book is not in chronological order, so it can be a challenge to read if you're not paying attention. And we find repetition throughout the entire book, whether that's repetition in some of the motifs in the action that occurs or just in the language in general. There are a ton of fleshed out characters in this book, with hardly a minor character to be seen. The two main characters to me were Yossarian and the chaplain. And while there aren't really any villains in the story, there aren't any heroes either. And it just drives home the point that in war there are no heroes, just victims. And speaking of the characters, we're not going to go through them all, only 3 of them. First, Yossarian. He is a captain and a bombardier on the B-25. The chaplain. He's a timid Anabaptist minister. Milo Minder Binder. He's an entrepreneurial, the mess officer at the base, and he's involved in the black market. And literally that's all so many characters, and those are all the ones that we're going to go through. Let's go ahead and talk about the plot of Catch-22. Yossarian, he's a bombardier, and he doesn't want to die. He'll fake illnesses. He'll poison the entire squadron. He'll change a map, start rumors, anything he can do to get out of flying missions. He is literally more terrified of his superior officers than the Germans, because his superior officers are the ones he feels like are trying to kill him by raising again and again and again the number of missions required to fly before you can be sent home. And they just have a complete disregard for the safety and the lives of those in their command. All right, so name of this book is Catch-22. What is a Catch-22? It's a dilemma or a difficult circumstance from which there is no escape because of mutually conflicting or dependent conditions. And if that was confusing in itself, we're going to go through a couple of examples when I go through my thoughts on the book. Yossarian's, his character and his courage are revealed as the book progresses. He comes off initially as a coward and selfish, but it turns out that he's just desperate. Desperate and pushed to the limits by the actual selfishness and cowardice of his commanding officers. And this is one of those books that it's just, you have to experience it. That's all about the plot I'm going to talk about. I didn't really talk about anything other than we have a guy who doesn't want to die, and he's in the Army, Air Force, or whatever. And it is just insane situations that he's placed in over and over again. I can't stress enough to you how much I think that you probably should read this book. It's not for everybody. Obviously, I couldn't get through it back 20-something years ago. And let's talk about that while we talk about my thoughts on Catch-22. I think that many years ago, I wasn't able to get through the book because I didn't have much of a sense of humor, or I didn't really understand humor in literature. I pretty much 25 years ago only read sci-fi and fantasy. Because of my experience, when I was trying to read this book, it was so far out of the realm of what I was used to reading. I just couldn't get into it or through it. Now, however, I have quite an appreciation for an absurd and comedic type situations. And I was continuously, as reading this book, laughing out loud. And full disclosure, I did read almost all of this book on Audible. And I think you should too. J.O. Sanders did a wonderful job. And I have listened to over 100 books on Audible at this time. And Sanders did one of the best jobs, one of the best narrations I've ever heard on Audible. So my question to you is, do you think narrators, can they influence your experience with a book? Can they change how you feel about a book? And I think so. I read Dune many times, starting from when I was in high school up until even last year. And last year I listened to it for the first time on Audible. And that experience changed my appreciation for the book. So it can, objectively, listening to a book is different than turning pages. It is just a different experience. I do obviously think that listening to books on Audible. It counts as reading a book. I would not be able to get through my 52 books in 52 weeks challenge if I weren't able to listen to audiobooks as I'm driving and commuting to work, or as I'm walking through the neighborhood and on the beach. And Sanders does do quite a few books on Audible, and maybe I will check out some of his books, some of his other titles. Other than that, I'm going to say about this book, this is a good example of a book that you should read about before you read it. You know, maybe Jane Eyre, you don't need to read about. Pride and Prejudice, perhaps. Those books you don't need to read. Anna Karenina, I think, would be enhanced by reading about it before you read it. Midnight's Children, The Magic Mountain. These books, I felt like having read them before I read about them before I read them, it really did help. And I think Catch-22, just having a basic understanding of the structure of the book before you turn the first page, it does enhance your experience. And I'm going to read a couple pages out of this book, not a couple pages, some passages out of this book. I think it's got a great first line. We'll read some examples of what a Catch-22 is in this book. And one of the other things that I've been enjoying as I'm reading all these different classic books. We'll talk about that briefly as well. So 3 little things in here. First of all, I love this first, I guess it's 2 lines. It was love at first sight. The first time Yossarian saw the chaplain, he fell madly in love with him. I don't know why. That just gets me every time I read that first line. It's just such a nice tone for the entire book. And I think first lines can be important on how we experience a book. And that's just, I don't know, I like it. Okay, so each chapter is named for a person in the book, one of the characters. And the first one is called the Texan. And Yossarian, he's faking an illness or using an advantage that he has with his body to stay in the hospital to avoid going and to war and putting his life on the line. So they bring into the sick hall there, they just refer to this officer as the Texan. And this is the name of the first chapter. And Yossarian's in the sick hall with some of his friends. And it says, the Texan turned out to be good-natured, generous, and likable. In 3 days, no one could stand him. I know you don't have any context, so it's not as amusing to you as it is for me. As I'm reading it, I'm like, you're probably not going to get it as much as I do, but I did really appreciate that. It set a nice tone for the book. Okay, so now we're going to read on page 20, and this is something that I've been enjoying as I'm reading these classic works this year. And I'm in the middle of Crime and Punishment right now. Main character is Raskolnikov. And here on page 20 of Catch-22. There's so much clever dialogue in this book. I love it. And I'm not surprised it took him 8 years to write it and publish it. Clevenger arrested himself in mid-declamation suspiciously. Who's Nathaniel? Nathaniel who? Inquired Yossarian innocently. Clevenger skirted the trap neatly. You think everybody is Jehovah. You are no better than Raskolnikov. Who? Yes, Raskolnikov. Who? Raskolnikov. Anyway, they go on and on. But as a guy who's reading currently Crime and Punishment about Raskolnikov, I know who they're talking about. And I find that really awesome. Also on page 414 in the book, if you have read Crime and Punishment, you'll know that Raskolnikov, when he was young, he went to town with his father, and while they're there, he witnessed a guy basically beat his horse to death because it couldn't pull a wagon full of a bunch of drunk people. So this guy was drunk, and he just beat his horse literally to death. So Yossarian was having a dream, and the dream was about a dog getting beaten. On the other side of the intersection, a man was beating a dog with a stick like the man who was beating the horse with a whip in Raskolnikov's dream. Now I'm confused. I didn't think in Raskolnikov, I thought Raskolnikov that was an actual occurrence. But maybe I have it backwards. Maybe it was a dream in Catch Crime and Punishment, and here it actually happened. Now I'm a little confused, so ignore that. I just appreciate the reference to Raskolnikov, and I find it over and over as I'm reading these classic books. It's been pretty awesome. Okay, Catch-22. What is a Catch-22? Yossarian goes to the doctor and says he doesn't want to fly any more missions. And he says, well, I'm crazy, Doc, so can't you pull me? And the doc says, well, there's a catch. Yossarian says, you mean there's a catch? Sure, there's a catch, Doc Danica replied. Catch-22. Anyone who wants to get out of combat duty isn't really crazy. There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind, or it was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask, and as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and would have to fly more missions. Or it would be crazy to fly more missions and sane if he didn't. But if he was sane, he had to fly them. If he flew them, he was crazy and didn't have to. But if he didn't want to, he was sane and had to. Yossarian was moved very deeply by the absolute simplicity of this clause of Catch-22 and let out a respectful whistle. That's some catch, that Catch-22, he observed. So earlier when I said that Catch-22 is a dilemma that you can't escape because of conflicting conditions, and that's exactly what it is. And that's a motif in this story. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've noted 5 different locations in Catch-22 where they're talking about different Catch-22s. And sometimes there's not really even a catch. They're just saying, no, you can't do that because it's Catch-22. I really like Yossarian. So he continuously rails against the bureaucracy and tries to find a way out. But still he shows up and he flies his missions. He falls in love literally with every girl that he sees. Often the fleshier the better. Yossarian was great. Almost all of the characters in this book were fantastic. Usually in a book like this with such a large cast of characters, you're not going to get each one fleshed out and get any backstory and get to know them and appreciate them. Not so for Catch-22. I feel like just about every character in here had a great story and you really got to know them. The only story arc that kind of lost me and I thought dragged on too much was, and I know the big fans of Catch-22 are going to lose it at this one, but Milo Minder Binder. I just felt like it just went on a little too much, and I mean, I understand that he was a symbolism for capitalistic greed and he had no allegiance only to profits. But it was just too much for me. I wasn't put off by it. I would have liked to have seen him a little less though. And I'll say that as I'm reading my 52 books in 52 weeks this year, none of them really have been an easy read. There's different degrees of difficulty that I've been reading this year, and as a lot of these books I've experienced these genres or these translations for the first time in my reading journey. It has been difficult in some cases for me, but I've appreciated it, and I've already read 30-something books. It's amazing to me how much I appreciate them, and even when I read like a Virginia Woolf and then the next Virginia Woolf, and I appreciate the next one better just because I understand the story or understand the flow of her works a little more. I didn't really appreciate Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. It took me a little bit, but I got into the groove. And I think Catch-22 is like that. You can get into it, you can appreciate it. It's not a super easy read, but it is worth it. Okay, so on to the star rating, and I judge all my books on 5 criteria, 6 if I listen to them on Audible. So let's get to it. Okay, first of all, my initial response. How did I feel as soon as I finished the book? And I gave it a 4. It was very good. It was very satisfying. Recommendation. How likely am I to recommend the book? And I'm only giving it a 3. It's not for everyone. There's some language and some other stuff in the book, maybe not appropriate for all audiences, maybe Mormons. 3, style. Did I enjoy the writing style? And I'm also only going to give it a 3 for this as well. I'm a fan of the omniscient narrative style, but I'm less so of the non-chronological type books. It's just sometimes I get lost a little bit. 4, plot and structure. How engaged was I in the story? And I got a 5. Like, what's going to happen next? Characters. Were they relatable, believable, engaging? Again, 5. So many characters, so good. And 6, Audible. For those books I listened to on Audible, how was the production of the book on Audible? And it definitely gets a 5. Sanders, he did a wonderful job. Again, I don't pick books based on the narrators. I haven't in the past, but I might look up J.O. Sanders afterwards, and I think you should too. He did a wonderful job. Okay, so that's 25, and 25 divided by 6 is 4.17. So 4.17 stars for Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Well earned. All right, my guys, I appreciate you sticking with me. If you've enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe to see more of my content. Like I said, I do both book and whiskey reviews, which is a little confusing, I know. But if you want to see more of my content, feel free to check it out. I have links in the description below for all the book reviews that I've done so far this year. So for now, I hope you are reading something good and drinking something great. Turn the pages, my friends, and stay thirsty.